You match a description. You're coming with me.
I haven't taken anything. Everything I have is in this basket. I'd like to see your identification.
My jacket is my identification.
I have ID. Let me show you.
I don't need your ID.
You should look at that camera before you decide what happens next.
Move, now.
You should.
Hashtag racist police officer assaults Black Navy SEAL at grocery store. Security footage exposes him. Officer Raymond Stokes, badge number 6203 of the Pinecrest Police Department, was off duty on a Saturday afternoon when he followed Marcus Cole, a black man in his late 30s, through 3 separate aisles of the Fairway Grocery on Henderson Boulevard, closing the distance each time Cole moved to a new section, positioning himself within arm's reach at the dairy case, and finally stopping him in the cereal aisle by stepping directly into his path, putting his hand flat against Cole's chest, and telling him that he had been watching him since the produce section and that Cole needed to come with him to the store's security office because he matched the description of a shoplifter who had been active in this location over the past 2 weeks. When Cole told him calmly that he had not shoplifted anything, that his basket contained 6 items, all of which were visible, and that he would like to see the officer's identification before going anywhere with anyone, Stokes told him that his attitude was making this worse and grabbed Cole's forearm. Cole removed Stokes's hand from his arm with a single controlled movement that the grocery store's aisle 4 security camera captured in complete clarity. Not aggressive, not retaliatory, simply a precise removal of an unwanted physical contact using a grip technique that anyone with advanced close-quarters combat training would recognize immediately, and that Stokes, who had not encountered it before, interpreted as assault. He then used both hands to shove Cole hard into the cereal display behind him, told him he was under arrest for shoplifting and assault on a law enforcement officer, and reached for the off-duty weapon he carried on his hip. 3 grocery store employees, 2 other customers, and the store manager, who had been called to aisle 4 30 seconds earlier by an employee who had been watching the interaction on the store's security monitor and had already decided something was wrong, all witnessed what happened next. What Stokes didn't know was that Marcus Cole had spent 14 years as a United States Navy SEAL, completing 6 combat deployments, earning the Silver Star for Valor in a classified operation off the coast of East Africa, and developing the specific quality of physical and psychological composure that allowed him to stand in a cereal aisle with a weapon being drawn on him and remain completely still, completely calm, and completely in control of every variable he could influence in the next 30 seconds. He also didn't know that the store manager, a woman named Patricia Reeves who had managed this location for 11 years, had been watching the encounter on her security monitor for 4 minutes before she came to aisle 4, that she had already called the Pinecrest Police Department's non-emergency line to report an off-duty officer behaving erratically toward a customer, and that the 4-camera coverage of aisle 4 was recording in high definition at 30 frames per second and had captured every second of a 3-minute pursuit through her store that Stokes would spend the next 18 months trying to explain. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments right now. We love seeing where our community is watching from. If you believe shopping for groceries while black should never involve being followed through 3 aisles, stopped with a hand to the chest, and threatened with an off-duty weapon, then like this video and subscribe. Because the security footage that Patricia Reeves had already been watching for 4 minutes before she picked up the phone is the reason that Officer Raymond Stokes's explanation never had anywhere to go. Marcus Cole had completed his separation from the United States Navy 11 months before the Saturday afternoon at Fairway Grocery. 14 years of active service. 6 deployments. A service record that contained commendations, a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and a collection of classified operational notations that would never appear in any document available to the public. He had been a SEAL for 11 of those 14 years, assigned to a team whose activities were not discussed in any forum he had ever participated in outside of secured briefing rooms. At 38 years old, Cole was building a second life in Pinecrest with the specific methodical patience that characterized everything he did. He had purchased a house 8 months earlier. He had started a personal security consulting business that was 18 months from being self-sustaining. He ran 6 miles every morning at 5:30. He cooked his own meals because 14 years of military nutrition discipline had made the habit automatic. He had a list on his refrigerator, handwritten, updated every Sunday, of the groceries he needed for the following week. On this Saturday he needed eggs, whole milk, oats, olive oil, a specific brand of Greek yogurt that the Fairway on Henderson stocked and the closer store did not, and a box of the cereal his nephew had requested for the overnight visit scheduled for the following weekend. He was wearing dark jeans, a plain gray t-shirt and running shoes. He carried a hand basket. He had been in the store for 11 minutes before he noticed the man following him. Cole had spent 14 years in environments where noticing things that other people missed was not a professional skill. It was the difference between coming home and not coming home. He noticed Stokes in the produce section. He clocked him again at the dairy case. By the time he turned into the cereal aisle and heard footsteps matching his pace from the entrance of the aisle, he had already identified the behavior pattern, assessed the likely trajectory, and made the decision to remain calm, visible, and completely legible to any camera that might be covering the space. He was reading the back of a cereal box when Stokes's hand hit his chest. Officer Raymond Stokes had been with the Pinecrest Police Department for 11 years. He was off-duty in civilian clothes, jeans, a Pinecrest PD jacket that identified his affiliation, and the off-duty holster he wore on his right hip as a matter of personal habit on days when he ran errands in the city. His personnel file was 16 complaints long, 11 filed by black individuals, racial profiling allegations, 2 unlawful search complaints, 1 excessive force report from 3 years earlier that had been reviewed and resulted in a mandatory counseling session that Stokes had attended and apparently not integrated. His captain had written in his most recent evaluation that Stokes showed strong initiative in identifying criminal activity in his patrol area. That evaluation had been written after complaint number 14. Stokes had entered Fairway Grocery to pick up a 6-pack and had spotted Cole in the produce section. Something in his assessment, the same assessment that had produced 16 complaints in 11 years, generated a conclusion that he had reached before following Cole through a single aisle. He told himself he was acting on professional instinct. He told himself the basket and the visible items did not eliminate the possibility of concealed shoplifting. He told himself that the way Cole moved through the store was consistent with behavior he had observed before in shoplifting situations. None of those things were true in any verifiable sense. The security footage would make that clear. But Stokes had spent 11 years operating in an environment where his instincts were called initiative and his complaints were called unsubstantiated. And that environment had not provided him with any mechanism for distinguishing between a professional instinct and a bias that had never been required to justify itself. He followed Cole through the produce section, through the dairy aisle, down the length of the frozen foods section, and into the cereal aisle where he stepped directly into Cole's path and put his hand flat against Cole's chest. "I've been watching you," Stokes said. "You match the description of a shoplifter we've been looking for at this location. I need you to come with me to the security office." Cole looked at the hand on his chest. He looked at Stokes. His expression did not change. "I haven't shoplifted anything," Cole said. His voice was the specific quality of calm that comes from having been in situations where volume and agitation are operationally counterproductive. "My basket has 6 items. They're all visible. I'd like to see your identification before I go anywhere with anyone." "My jacket tells you who I am," Stokes said. "Your jacket tells me you're affiliated with the Pinecrest Police Department," Cole said. "I'd like your name and badge number." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Stokes said. His hand, still on Cole's chest, moved to Cole's forearm. Cole looked at the hand on his forearm. He made a single controlled movement, not a pull, not a shove, not a strike, but a precise wrist rotation that disengaged Stokes's grip with the efficiency of a technique practiced 10,000 times. Any trained observer would have identified it immediately as a defensive control technique. Stokes, who was not a trained observer in the relevant sense, felt the contact leave his hand and classified it as an attack. He used both hands to shove Cole into the cereal display. Cole hit the shelving unit, dislodged 2 boxes of cereal that fell to the floor, steadied himself against the shelf, and turned back to face Stokes without rushing. His basket was still in his hand. The 6 items were still in the basket. His breathing had not changed. "You just assaulted me," Cole said. Completely even. Completely factual. You assaulted a law enforcement officer, Stokes said, his voice now elevated. His right hand had moved to his hip. You're under arrest. Shoplifting and assault on a law enforcement officer. Do not move. Cole did not move. He stood exactly where he was, both hands visible, basket in his left hand, and looked at Stokes with the expression of someone who has assessed a situation completely and is waiting for it to resolve itself through the processes that are about to arrive. Those processes arrived 30 seconds later in the form of Patricia Reeves. Patricia Reeves had managed the fairway on Henderson for 11 years. She had a security monitor in her office that covered 8 camera zones, including aisle 4, and she had been watching the man in the Pinecrest PD jacket follow a customer through 3 sections of her store for 4 minutes before she called the non-emergency line and before she walked to aisle 4 herself. She had managed this store long enough to know the difference between a shoplifting interdiction and something else. What she had been watching on her monitor for 4 minutes was something else. She came around the corner into aisle 4 and took in the scene. Cole against the shelving unit, both hands visible, basket intact. 2 boxes of cereal on the floor. Stokes with his hand on his hip and his voice elevated. 3 of her employees already in the aisle entrance. 2 customers who had been in the aisle when the confrontation started and had not left. Sir, Reeves said to Stokes, her voice carrying the specific authority of someone who owns this space in every sense that matters. I am the store manager. I have been watching this interaction on our security system for the past 4 minutes. This gentleman has not shoplifted anything. I have 4-camera coverage of every aisle he has been in since he entered this store. What I have on my system is footage of you following him. She paused. I've already called your department. Stokes turned to her. This man assaulted a law enforcement officer. I have that on camera too, Reeves said. All of it. From 4 angles. Silence. Cole set his basket down on the shelf beside him with the deliberate care of someone who is removing all possible variables from the next 5 minutes. He reached into his pocket and produced his wallet. From his wallet he removed a card. Not a military ID, not a credential case, just a plain business card for his personal security consulting firm, and held it out to no one in particular, as a gesture of documentation rather than a request. Then he looked at Stokes. I spent 14 years as a Navy SEAL, Cole said. His voice had the same quality it had carried throughout. Not raised, not shaking, not performing anything. What you felt when you grabbed my arm was a standard defensive grip release. It is the first technique taught in basic close-quarters defensive training. It is not an assault. It is a response to an unauthorized physical contact. He looked at Reeves. I would like a copy of your security footage, please. Already saving it, Reeves said. 2 uniformed Pinecrest officers arrived in aisle 4 minutes later, responding to Reeves's call. They looked at their colleague in the Pinecrest PD jacket. They looked at Cole, standing with both hands visible and a grocery basket containing 6 items. They looked at Reeves, who was holding her phone showing them a live feed of the aisle 4 camera. They looked at 5 witnesses, all of whom immediately and simultaneously began describing what they had seen in the preceding 7 minutes. The senior of the 2 responding officers, a sergeant named Williams, looked at Stokes for a long time before speaking. Raymond, Williams said quietly, I need you to step to the front of the store. Stokes started to object. Now, Williams said. Stokes went to the front of the store. Williams turned to Cole. Sir, are you injured? Cole considered the question honestly. My shoulder hit the shelving unit. I'll have it looked at. He looked at Williams steadily. I want a formal incident report. I want the report to reflect that I was followed through 3 aisles before any contact was made, that the physical contact was initiated by your officer, and that the grip release your officer classified as assault is a documented defensive technique that I am prepared to demonstrate to any use of force expert your department wishes to consult. Williams looked at him for a moment. Your name, sir? Marcus Cole. He handed Williams the business card. Former Navy SEAL. Current Pinecrest resident. And as of this afternoon, your department's next civil rights complaint. Attorney Dominique Hargrove filed the federal lawsuit 19 days after the Fairway incident. The complaint sought $11.4 million and named Stokes personally, the Pinecrest Police Department institutionally, and the city for systematic failure to address 16 complaints over 11 years. The security footage was the foundation of everything. For camera angles, 30 frames per second. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of footage that began in the produce section and ended with 2 cereal boxes on the floor of aisle 4. The footage showed Cole entering the store, selecting items, navigating 3 sections without interacting with any other person, and being followed at decreasing distances by a man who had not been in the store when Cole entered. It showed the hand to the chest. It showed the forearm grab. It showed the grip release, a movement that Hargrove had a retired Navy SEAL instructor evaluate on camera for the subsequent news coverage, describing it in 18 seconds as a textbook defensive disengagement that posed zero offensive threat to the person whose grip it released. It showed the two-handed shove. It showed Cole hitting the shelving unit and turning back without escalating. The footage also showed something that none of the witnesses had been positioned to see. In the 30 seconds between the shove and Reeves's arrival in the aisle, the footage captured Stokes looking at Cole, who was standing completely still with his basket in his hand, and then looking at his own right hand, and then looking at Cole again. It was a 3-second sequence. In those 3 seconds, the footage showed a man who had just shoved someone into a shelving unit in a grocery store looking at the evidence of what he had done and making the decision to classify it as something other than what it was. Hargrove showed that 3-second sequence to the jury in her opening statement. She returned to it in her closing argument. She described it as the moment in which a bias became a choice, the moment when Stokes could have recognized what had happened and instead decided to call it assault because calling it assault was the only version of events in which his behavior had a justification. The internal investigation examined all 16 complaints simultaneously. The pattern was by this point familiar to anyone who had been following the string of cases that Hargrove had litigated over the previous 4 years, a statistically significant concentration of complaints from Black individuals, 2 use-of-force incidents classified as within guidelines by review boards operating without complete complaint histories, and a series of performance evaluations that rewarded the behavior the complaints were describing and called it something else. The investigation also produced the testimony of the 2 responding officers, both of whom described arriving at aisle 4 and immediately assessing the scene as inconsistent with Stokes's account of events. Sergeant Williams testified that in his 12 years on the force he had responded to approximately 40 shoplifting interdictions and that the scene in aisle 4, a man standing calmly with a basket of visible unpurchased items while a store manager described watching him being followed on a security monitor, did not correspond to any of them. Stokes was suspended with pay pending investigation on the Monday following the incident. He was suspended without pay 6 weeks later when the internal investigation's preliminary findings were completed. He was terminated 4 months after that. His certification was revoked. He lost his pension after 11 years of service. The footage, all 3 minutes and 47 seconds of it, plus the 3-second sequence that Hargrove had identified in her opening statement, had been viewed 51 million times across multiple platforms and had been covered by every major national outlet as one of the clearest documented cases of off-duty racial profiling and use of force ever captured on retail security cameras. The city settled for the full $11.4 million 10 months after the complaint was filed. The settlement required all officers to complete use of force recertification with a specific module on off-duty conduct and the limits of off-duty enforcement authority. It required the department's complaint review process to conduct pattern analysis on a rolling 18-month window for any officer with more than 3 complaints. It required body cameras to be carried and activated by officers in uniform regardless of on-duty or off-duty status. And it required the department to publish quarterly use-of-force statistics broken down by race, location, and on-duty versus off-duty status. A transparency measure that the department's leadership had resisted for 6 years and that the settlement made permanent. Raymond Stokes was 44 years old at termination. He contested his certification revocation through the state's Law Enforcement Standards Board and lost the appeal 8 months after filing it. The 3-second sequence from aisle 4 was entered into evidence at the appeal hearing. He has not held a law enforcement position since. He works in property management. The footage is in the permanent record. It will remain there. Sergeant Williams received a commendation for his conduct on scene and his complete cooperation with the internal affairs investigation. He was promoted to lieutenant 14 months after the incident and became one of the architects of the department's revised off-duty conduct policy. He was 41 years old at promotion and described the revised policy in a department newsletter as the kind of thing that should have been written before the first complaint, not after the 16th. Patricia Reeves continued managing the fairway on Henderson. She updated the store's security system to 24-hour cloud backup storage following the incident, a decision she described in a local news interview as one that cost the store approximately $800 and had already paid for itself more times than she could count. She was recognized by the city council for her role in the case 8 months after the settlement. She accepted the recognition and used her 3 minutes at the podium to ask the council what policy changes they were prepared to make before the next incident rather than after it. Marcus Cole's consulting business became self-sustaining 14 months after the fairway incident, 2 months ahead of his projection. He used $4 million of his settlement to establish the Cole Foundation, providing legal support and transitional resources to veterans navigating civilian life who encountered law enforcement bias in communities where their service record provided no protection from the assumptions that had followed them out of uniform. In its first 2 years, the foundation assisted over 120 people. Many of them had stories that followed the same basic shape as aisle 4. A public space, an ordinary errand, an officer whose assessment had been formed before any interaction occurred, and a record of prior complaints that the department had chosen not to read as a pattern. He still shops at the fairway on Henderson. Patricia Reeves has never charged him for the 2 boxes of cereal that ended up on the floor. He still runs 6 miles every morning at 5:30. He still updates his grocery list every Sunday. He still cooks his own meals. He still has the specific quality of calm that 14 years of operating in environments where composure was a survival requirement had built into him at a level below conscious choice. He is also, when the situation requires it, the kind of person who can stand in a cereal aisle with a weapon being drawn on him and wait with complete stillness for the store manager who has been watching the whole thing on a monitor for 4 minutes to come around the corner and say the words that the footage has already made inevitable. The lesson lives in 3 minutes and 47 seconds of retail security footage. A man walked into a grocery store with a list. He selected 6 items. He was followed through 3 sections by an officer who had formed his conclusion in the produce department and spent the next 4 minutes looking for a justification that the footage was recording. Was not there. A store manager watched all of it on a monitor before it escalated. She called. She came. She had already saved the footage before she reached the aisle. 16 complaints. 11 years. 11 black individuals. 0 pattern reviews. Until 4 camera angles at 30 frames per second and a store manager who had been watching for 4 minutes made the explanation impossible. $11.4 million. 1 certification revoked. 1 department restructured. 1 policy written that should have been written after complaint number 3. 1 foundation helping veterans who came home to find that the uniform they had taken off provided no protection from the assumptions that had been waiting for them. It should not require a silver star, a store manager with a 4-camera security system, and a grip release technique that a use-of-force expert can describe in 18 seconds to buy groceries on a Saturday afternoon. It keeps requiring them because the complaints keep getting closed and the officers who produce 16 of them over 11 years keep being called initiatives until the morning the cereal boxes hit. The floor and the footage is already saving. If you believe that a grocery basket with 6 visible items should be the end of a shoplifting suspicion and not the beginning of a 3-minute pursuit through 3 aisles, share this story with everyone who needs to understand what unchecked bias costs when the cameras are already running and the manager has already called. What specific reforms would require pattern reviews after complaint number 3 rather than after the lawsuit settlement requires the department to look at all 16 at the same time? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe that $11.4 million is not the ceiling, It is the floor of what accountability should cost when 16 complaints were dismissed and a store manager understood the situation better than the officer 4 minutes before the officer did. Subscribe. Because we are not finished until the pattern review that should have happened after complaint number 3 is the policy and not the thing that gets written into a settlement that the city signs. After the footage has already been viewed 51 million times.